Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Oh, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Jonathan Mamaril from NB Lawyers around the topic, helping employers navigate legal obstacles. Jonathan, how are you today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm really good. How's your day been?
It's been good. It's been very good. We're obviously quite busy at the moment with a number of matters around workforces and workforce planning and people management. But the team's keeping busy and doing quite well.
Yeah, nice. For those people who don't know Jonathan, would you be so kind as to just give everyone just a bit of an intro about who you are, NB Lawyers, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Sure.
Over to you.
So Saul, we're a boutique law firm that helps employers and organizations deal with a number of business issues and people management. So lately we've been dealing with a lot of redundancies and restructures, dealing with underpayment of wages, termination, and then on this commercial and property side, dealing with mergers and acquisitions and property acquisition as well. So as NB Lawyers, the lawyers for employers, we're really there to sort of help employers and business overcome those legal obstacles that are in their way. Yeah,
sure. So when I was thinking about the topic for this and we were discussing it, I think one of the key things, knowing what you guys already do and having used your services too, but I guess you personally, I don't know about what other people, like their perception of law. Like most people only, would use legal services, I suppose, in many instances in a reactive sort of way. But the thing that I've always found really interesting, and I guess this, obviously ties in specifically to you being like the lawyers for employers, like the way that you, I guess, work with HR departments and all those other issues is really that idea of being able to help people to navigate, like is a key sort of thing. Like is when like as the business has evolved, have you found that particular idea has become more important, like when you're talking to people?
Yeah, absolutely. So we live for really key values, and the first value is help first. So we always have that mindset of trying to help when and if we can. And the way we do that is in many ways. Of course, there is the aspect of just dealing with the issue. And so one of our values is just produce results. Absolutely. Another value is, of course, being practical. So providing practical advice. And that's where probably the more preventative measures that can be put in place. So it's not just about dealing with the particular issue at hand. It's not just about interpreting the law. It's not just about even applying that law, but also providing options and, of course, the actual recommendation for the client as to what we think is the best way forward to either mitigate risk, mitigate liability, or even just to deal with whatever the issue is and try and overcome it.
Yeah, I guess that it's like a lot of things. You don't know what you don't know, right? So having someone who's got your back to be able to, like in any sort of circumstance, but then like the I guess the things that may or may not happen in a legal sense are in many ways even more important, because like you don't know what those things are if you've got nobody educating you or kind of like guiding you, which is why I sort of brought that up, because it's my I guess experience generally of many people when they need legal services is like sort of reactive. Would you say that's true? Like in like when they actually come to you in the first place. I mean, what they should do is, of course, be asking for advice and having that guidance. That's the ideal scenario.
Yeah. And so what we really focus on, Saul, is education. So it's all well and good to have the information, because the reality is a lot of the legal information, cases, legislation could be potentially, if you know what you're doing, in some respects, could be found online. So that's not necessarily the power. So the whole point of you don't know what you don't know, that partly that's true, but partly it's also about educating around the information, so the risks, for example, but also potentially what are the strategies to deal with those risks. And that's where we really come in, is to obviously help prevent, of course, if we can, deal with whatever the issue is. But even if there are mistakes being made, if mistakes have been made, even if it's already in litigation or it's about to go into litigation, we're also there to help. So it's not just about one particular area or one particular part of the journey, but it's all about the whole journey for the client, because the whole point of what we're trying to do is then help that client to put themselves in a position where they can go and grow and do the things that they actually wanted to do, as opposed to dealing with whatever these legal obstacles that come in their way.
Yeah, sure. So how do you, with all that in mind then too, like how do you, or do you then work with or work in with, say, like either internal HR departments or HR people that are working with their own clients or then with joint clients? Like how do you actually work in with those people?
So internal HR teams in particular are a little bit more sophisticated around employment law, industrial relations. So, issues around the Fair Work Act, issues around the enterprise agreements, they're a little bit more sophisticated around that. So it's not necessarily about giving the answer to what modern award applies, or very, much more basic information that way. It's more about giving them a plan or even a strategy for whatever it is that they want to do with the business. And in particular, for a lot of HR managers or HR business partners, they really got a seat at the table in terms of making decisions or key decisions about the business, even discussing it with the board directly. So for those in those HR teams, what we try to do is get them a plan or options so they can actually play around with. So for example, right now, there's a lot of work we're doing around redundancy and restructure advice. Now, restructures don't necessarily mean redundancies. It could mean combination of positions. It could be a reduction in hours. It could be an incentive strategy to try to keep certain staff members. There could be a number of things that we need to talk about. And so we try to give them a baseline about what the legal risks are, but also try to work in practically as to what the business actually wants to do.
Yeah, sure. So have you seen an increase in particular cases like that at this present time with everything that's been happening since March? Like how have you seen, or what sort of increases or changes have you seen in your areas of law at the moment?
The employment side obviously has been heavily relied upon by clients. The big issues coming around at the moment. So during COVID, it was very much around what do we actually do? And there were some organizations in, say, in the airline industries, in hospitality, in retail, they were really struggling, and they had to get advice in regards to termination, in regards to this unfair dismissal claims and job protections claims and redundancy claims. Like there was definitely those really immediate reactionary issues. For other organizations, it was uncertainty. And then JobKeeper sort of came in, and that gave them a little bit more certainty about their staff. So that's where you had a little bit more advice around reduction in hours, changes to positions and duties, working from home, what are the risks there, that was the more discussion around that. And then once we started going sort of beyond that, so around now, and in particular, especially with the discussion or the rollout of JobKeeper post-September, many organizations aren't going to be eligible or have the criteria for eligibility. Of course, there's a reduction in the actual payout anyway. So now there's a lot of organizations looking at restructuring the way they're going to be doing business because they've done their forecasting, they've got their budgets, and so there's a lot of restructuring work around people management, and of course the discussions around that. And what, of course, with all that, you have a lot of claims. So right now we're dealing with a lot of general protections claims, a lot of unfair dismissal claims, and even breach of contract claims, especially at that executive level, and some discrimination claims. So if you think about it, there's some, really interesting ones around discrimination because someone was working from home, because they had family responsibilities, then want to get someone sick. There's a lot of that type of those cases. They're already getting released out into the commission, in the federal court, in the discrimination commission, which we're already dealing with. So, and of course, on top of that is performance management, managing performance. How can we manage the productivity levels? There was definitely clients who were saying productivity was fantastic during COVID. That initial period, it was, quite good. There was obviously disruption around technology and use of technology, and maybe it's a little bit more formalized over Zoom or Teams or something like that. There was definitely that struggle, but the productivity was quite good. However, as people have sort of got used to now working from home, the productivity for some of the organizations we're talking to, and who are quite large, they're saying that productivity is dipping. So does that now correlate with potentially looking at a salary cut as well? If the productivity is dipping, the salary cut, and how do you manage that? So difficult conversations, difficult strategies are required, and to some extent, it'll depend on the industry, the company, and even in some respects, the actual particular employee you're talking to.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it's a really interesting area looking at it from our perspective, which I suppose is the perspective of a lot of businesses who have all of a sudden been, thrust into working from home. And I wondered too. I'd just like to talk to you as well about compliance. There's already things that we've talked about in the past too, in relation to the digital space. Now, I had sort of, the more I'd thought about it, I'd been thinking like how much of a potentially huge kind of issue these things are becoming even more, because you've got like not only just for the broad issue of cybersecurity, but then people who either should be or shouldn't be supplying their employees with machines, or if they're using their own machines, and what risks they open up. Like, have you seen an increase in that area as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, it's just in terms of cybersecurity, the companies that are dealing with cybersecurity are trying to get the word out to warn employers around the risks, and there are many risks around that. In terms of the employment side, or even just the legal side, there is this issue around working from home and conduct working from home and using equipment working from home. So your base level health and safety issues. A lot of organizations didn't have time to do proper audits. Realistically, in practical terms, not many could. That's obviously changed now, as there's been some restrictions. I mean, at least in Queensland. Obviously, in other states, there's different changes, but I think that's where organizations can just get an easy win around getting some type of health and safety audit around working from home spaces, because yes, in terms of what's the question around liability, who's going to be liable? Well, the answer is the employer will be liable that's true. That hasn't changed.
It seems like a real minefield though, because like, I mean, I'm not a legal person obviously, but
yeah.
I would, you saying that to me then straight away, like, well, how I logically understand that, but then you've got like how much responsibility versus then how much, control, or how many options does the employer have to influence what then happens at home if they're working from home outside of, supplying computers or supplying guidelines or supplying those things. Outside of that, you can't really, there's no other enforcement unless you say, I have to come and, inspect somebody's house, which probably isn't going to be happening, I would imagine. I don't know.
No. And not many have.
No.
I mean, there are self-audit. So potentially, for example, you could have an employee take photos of their workspace and send it through as part of an overall policy or procedure. Like that could be one way to mitigate, at least saying, well, okay, the workspace looks okay. Or alternatively, like, we need to, this needs to be covered. We'll send someone or whatever it is, like, make the adjustments. So that is one way, a practical way, I suppose, that you could deal with it. I mean, of course, if you got to have some overarching policies, it's just not going to work otherwise. There has to be some element of control over your employees and the employee and the conduct of the employees. For an employee to say it is, it's my private house and therefore I can do whatever. Well, yeah, there's nothing. No one's saying that's not true. But in terms of when you're working, and the workspace, well, that's a different question, because and there's many cases in the past who've essentially established that, and mostly for workers' compensation purposes, but have established that, hey, if you're working during a specific time, then there is a responsibility, of course, of the employer, but also of the employee in regards to their own health and safety. So this is where, and of course that works well with performance management as well. Sure, we can provide flexibility around when you're going to do the work, especially if there's going to be shutdowns. And, in say Melbourne, for example, if you're listening in Melbourne, if there's going to be shutdowns and you've got to do this with kids and everything else, of course that's going to be taken into consideration, but there needs to be some type of plan as to when the work's going to be done.
Yeah. I guess I'm probably no different to many people. There's, I suppose, like when you're not diving into the details of things like you are all the time, when you're thinking about these things and you're completely across everything, I would imagine, and you let me know if this is a common thing or sort of not at all, where people have an impression that workplace health and safety as a general idea, mostly like only relates, to if you're in a specific workplace, not at home. Like it obviously doesn't, but as a general impression that you would sort of have you come across, that general idea that people are going, well, there's, it obviously doesn't apply to me because I'm working from home, because like it's obviously not a workplace. This is my house.
I think there's been many different attitudes. There has, especially in that professional atmosphere, accounting firms and consultants and financial planners, that type of area, where there is still that element of, well, we are still, even if you're working from home and you're Zooming, you still got to abide, it's like you're still in the workplace, the attire, the language. Of course, we're still going to, we're going to forgive the cat that walks around and the kid that's in the background. Like that stuff is, I don't think is too much of an issue. I'm sure that there might be some organizations that I haven't come across one, but more so the actual person's appearance, for example, and all that type of stuff. there's still that element. In terms of other organizations who are not necessarily in that ring, there's been a much more lax attitude, which is fine. That, there's I think where the problems are is when you have employees, for example, that some of them maybe even making more money on JobKeeper than they actually are when they actually were working. So there's an element of trying to get them to actually work. There's also an element of employees, not being as productive as they would be in the workplace, and that could be for a myriad of reasons. Not just necessarily the negative connotations you have around that. So that, I think that's where the problems have definitely surfaced. And in terms of our clients, we've seen a number of claims around that. So, an employer trying to manage that performance or manage that conduct remotely have found it difficult. And then, a claim sort of coming across. So that part is being difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there established guidelines that like either via government or via other organizations that are already in place, like for working from home? Because obviously, like this, it's not only because of the current situation that people are working from home. They have, like, for a long time, it's just been like there's been an influx in it. So are there general, like, it's obviously very different, from business to business as to how the perception is, but are there some guidelines around that are already out there?
Well, not that in terms of guidelines from government, I don't think there would be anything. Really. There might be something from the Fair Work Commission or Ombudsman or something like that. Maybe even from Health and Safety Queensland or Health and Safety New South Wales. Or, look, yes, maybe, but I think the overall principle or premise is this. If you're working from home, it's basically like working at the office. That, in terms of office staff, that really doesn't change all that much. The technology changes, maybe the times, the flexibility, but you could be already having that conversation anyway. So I think the mentality or the principles are pretty much the same. It doesn't really change too much, and the cases support that. It's not, just because. Social media is a great one. People think that they use social media as if they're talking at a cafe. Well, no, it's different. It's completely different. You're talking to a wider audience potentially. It's not like talking at a cafe. That's right, a whole world.
Yeah.
And so, what you're saying about an employer or a fellow employee or something like that is actually broadcast.
It's really just common sense, isn't it? It's not, it's interesting because I still always am amazed. It's still exactly what you were saying, like where people obviously, like, people aren't generally stupid. Like, people know that, if they say something online, that the whole world's going to see it, but they still don't treat it like that. And, that, and then just general ideas about how you should do things is generally common sense. Like, most people understand that, but it's still, it is obviously important to have guidelines for things, because it just helps things along, and it helps to, that's where you come in then, I suppose, too, is to, having, this has been like a bit of a common thread across a couple of podcasts too, about, the power of like a third party. It's a bit different in the legal sense, because then you're offering, legal advice, but still there's that similar idea of, like you said before, like you could go online and you could see what the rules are around certain subjects, and that's fine. You're sort of educated, but it is very different than to having proper advice from an expert in the field.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it would be very easy for someone to do it by themselves. That'd be it'd be quite difficult. And of course, there's some people that could potentially do it. Some fail badly and some do well. But I suppose the real key is what you actually do with that information. I think back, years and years and years ago, that information wasn't as widespread. You didn't have that access to information. So in some respects, part of that service was actually just dispelling that information to the client. Of course, you still do that as a lawyer, and you still need to do that, of course, and you still need to understand and know your craft and know what you're talking about, of course. But in terms of what you actually do with that, you've still got to be able to utilize that, and in particular in this period, it's about having a plan or being strategic. There's just there's many organizations that will just constantly react to whatever the people management issues are. And that's fine. If you want to keep doing that, that's no problem. And then of course there's outliers. There's always going to be outliers where you have situations where, you have done quite a lot right. It's just, it didn't matter. But in those cases though, you mitigated a lot of your risk. Does that make sense? So even if you, mitigate your liability, sorry. So even if you do, everything goes wrong and you do lose the case, the liability is lessened considerably. I'm always saying to clients, you've got to think about these couple of things. Whatever action, decision that you decide to make around people management, you've got to be able to defend that in front of a commissioner or a judge. And if you're able to defend that, what evidence do you have to ensure that they sway towards your side of things as opposed to the other side? And if you keep that in mind, then that should, help in any decision-making process. So if you think, yes, there's some ambiguity around this, if, we've got someone who's, ill or sick and, or there's some family responsibility issues or there's a work cover claim, you should sort of stop and readjust, and you might need to go get advice. That's absolutely true, because whatever decision you make may be completely tainted by the information. And if you can't dispel that causal link, you could be in real strife.
Yeah, I suppose like there's that aspect of the topic that we're talking about you helping people to navigate obstacles where people's interpretation of what the obstacles may be from either their own education or from hearsay aren't the real obstacles even. So one of it's that key thing of even knowing what the obstacles are in the first place, and that is especially important in what you do. But you could safely say that's the case in a lot of areas in business where people are offering advice. There's in the sense that people often will see what they want to see too. I'm probably no different if you're looking for something, for a certain answer, and you aren't being guided with impartial proper advice. You might find the answer that you're looking for because you're going to interpret something in the way you want to see it, and then oops, it may not be right.
And that's why when we deal with organizations that have internal HR teams or HR teams, the discussion is a lot different. It's a lot more about strategy and planning it out, lining up the ducks, as I would say. When organizations don't have that or don't have access to that, yes, the decisions can be a little bit more, reactive, on the sense of, say, maybe fairness or some sort of principle like that. The problem with that is, in particular with the Fair Work Act, and even some modern awards and enterprise agreements, that's not necessarily rewarded. There are some quirks, and there are some, for example, just because you think that you're not going to be you can be protected from unfair dismissal. Doesn't mean that dispels the issues around, say, general protections, which has a reverse onus of proof, which can claim penalties against people individually that goes from the Fair Work Commission all the way to the Federal Circuit Court straight away, which talks about rules of evidence, which is true litigation proceedings. Or it doesn't talk, it doesn't dispel the issues about breach of contract. If your contract hasn't been particularly drafted properly or hasn't drafted at all, you've got reasonable notice issues. Years ago, the Queensland Reds got caught out in that. So there's discrimination. There's many issues that just because you feel like this is, it's not fair or something along those lines, or even you think it's common sense, that's not necessarily rewarded under the Act. So I think organizations, no matter what size, need to become a little bit more sophisticated in dealing with people management. It's, the days of handshake agreements and things like that, realistically or in practical terms, you should be looking at formalizing arrangements. And if you're going to performance manage someone, do it properly. Go and actually performance manage them on metrics and what's the shortfall and what's the what needs to be done, what can we do to help, and then provide a timeline. Like if there's misconduct, like actually put the allegation to them so you can get their side of the story, because then you can dispel things of procedural fairness and natural justice. This is that for organizations right now, it's probably even more important to really ensure that they deal with, in particular, tricky employee issues and even IR issues as well, carefully.
Yeah. I would. How have you seen, or like, have you seen people having to, like, given this change with working from home and any other things that have been happening, and I suppose quite quickly for some people, have you seen people like having to all of a sudden change or modify employee contracts, or to actually have them in the first place, I suppose, because of these changes too? Have you seen much of that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, yeah. Variations to employment contracts during changing hours and even changing positions and duties. Yeah, absolutely, of course. And that's just an easy way to formalize whatever those arrangements are. That should just be the byproduct of whatever discussions have occurred. The real meat is really how that's communicated. That's really where the real meat is. The contract, yes, you got to have properly drafted and all those things, of course, yes. But the real meat is how it's communicated. That's the key. Because if you don't communicate it in a way that benefits your plan or your perspective or even your strategy, yes, that's when you'll have disputes for sure, absolutely. And sometimes it's going to be hard. There are organizations that we're dealing with right now who, they've got 500 staff. They've got to communicate this, of course. Understandably, it's going to be difficult, and there has to be a proper plan in place to do that, because the contract itself or the variation itself is just a byproduct of all that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me that the more stuff generally you have, the more important that is, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it's important in any scenario. But I mean, like you said, like I can especially see like having a little bit of an insight, like into that HR sort of space, like how tightly and how much benefit there would really be to really any employer for you and a HR department to be working in sync. Like is that common? Like in the in your world, like yes. in the world of like is what you're doing now, the way that you work, is that common, or is that something that you have come to in your business, realize that there's more benefit and it's more unique rather than like the common thing that happens all the time?
Yeah, I think with us, we will work with usually HR departments or HR teams, sometimes with the finance teams or CFO, sometimes with the CEO or the board or directors. But usually it will be the people who are responsible for the people management or people manager of that particular person. And the way we try and work with them is to, I suppose, in some respects, give them a roadmap. Okay. So whatever it is that they intend to do, whatever that target is. So it may be that, they've got a tricky situation where they've only got 2 spots or 2 positions available for 4 people. And they can't, how are they going to split it? Yeah. And that can be difficult because especially if someone's been there for a long time. So how do you work that strategy in? You might look at skills and capabilities and you might look at what the position is. And then you might get thrown a curveball where the board might suggest, hey, why don't we actually go out to the open market as well? So you've got to somehow control that communication. And that's where we really, really assist because, of course, we've got that legal perspective, right? That's the baseline. If you do this, it's going to be, it carries a lot of risk. How do you mitigate that risk? And how do you mitigate that liability? And that's the steps you want to try to take. And there are times where we can look at avoiding it altogether. But what does that mean? Does it cost the client something? For example, if you want to go down a redundancy instead of actually performance managing someone out, all right, you could potentially make it work. But that could mean that you can't have someone in that position for a period of time. That could be quite disruptive.
Yeah.
It could be quite a bit of an issue. There's also redundancy pay you got to think about. So different strategies and different options, it will just depend on level of risk that the client wants to take, but also in particular, what is actually their goal? Like what do they actually want? Because sometimes when clients come to us and say, hey, we want to do this and we want to terminate this staff member, of course, the question I'll say is why, and the reasoning might be completely illegal. Could be absolutely illegal. And then I'll ask them, what else is in play? What are the other reasons? And usually those other reasons come out. And so the goal might completely change.
Yeah. And hence like, once again, the importance of even having somebody that's going to go through all those options with them too, but what about like your engagement or how you act in the whole scheme of, employer, employee, and then with, trade unions, where do you work or how do you engage with them?
Yeah, so I've got a trade union background, and because of that trade union background, it gives me a bit of a unique insight into what the other side are thinking. Because we predominantly work for employers, as with our moniker is lawyers for employers. So we predominantly work for employers, and therefore some of the issues that prop up sometimes that are not really understood, I can give some insights as to why, because it might be an overall campaign or part of a campaign that the union is roping this client into or this business into. So in terms of, yes, we've had to deal with a number of matters. So we've got a few EBAs on foot. And yes, we're dealing with objections from trade unions. And we're also dealing with, situations where unions are making themselves a little bit well known, especially in, say, the manufacturing space. And there's obviously myriad of reasons for that. But what it means is that for clients in that space, they need to be extra vigilant about what they want to do. And there are, of course, many strategies that we've been working on, especially around structuring and commercial setup, even of the business as well, to try and deal with some of the prickly IR issues.
Yeah, I bet. So as we actually get towards the end probably of the podcast, have you got anything? Because we've covered like quite a few things there. Obviously, not like every, it's mainly about the employment side of things. But have you got anything in particular that for any employers listening that you'd sort of like to say in terms of the importance, especially around the topic, because it seems like such a key thing to me that it's so very helpful, especially the way that you work with HR and that education sort of piece too, making sure that people are sort of as across issues as they can be. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Yeah, if you're in a situation now where you're looking at your workforce, you're looking at your workers, you're starting to comprehend, the financial forecasts of your organization, and you do need to make changes, you really need to keep in mind a number of things. Firstly, what is it that you're gonna actually do? So have you got to think, okay, what's actually going to happen? And that might mean talking to your CFO, talking to your financial team, talking to your accountant. So what is it actually is going to happen, or what needs to happen? Secondly, okay, well, how is that going to affect, from a number of organizations, people or wages is probably going to be the largest expense. So what do we need to do there? And if it means restructuring as well, and again, this is a great opportunity as well for organizations who have been looking to restructure. It's a great opportunity to now restructure right now. And I'm not saying about redundancy, it's just restructuring the business and the model of the business. It's a great time to do it. And if you need to start thinking that, then you got to start thinking, okay, whatever decisions, whatever actions we're going to take, we have to think at some point, a commissioner or judge is going to look at this and give an opinion.
Yeah, it's certainly a reflective time, isn't it? I think that's a great piece of advice. And with that in mind, I'll just also ask you, Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind, if you'd be so kind as to provide us with some sort of quote that you either like or you find is sort of relevant to what we've been talking about. What do you got?
What have I got?
Yeah, what have you got, Jonathan?
Well, what I can say is this one. All right. So in terms of MB lawyers, the lawyers for employers, like our purpose. And so we really try to ingrain this in our staff and also with our clients, is that our purpose is to help employers overcome legal obstacles, reach their goals, and focus on growth. So you can quote me on that one, mate.
You quoted it.
Well, yeah, well, that's right.
And thank you for that. That's much appreciated. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. It's been awesome. Just let everyone know too about the best and easiest way to get in contact with you and or NB Lawyers, where they can go online or how best to contact you guys.
Yeah, brilliant. Website, www.lawyersforemployers.com.au. Phone number, 0738765111. And if you want to get in contact with me personally by email, it's Jonathan M, so it's JONATHAN, and then the letter M, at nb-lawyers.com.au. But if you check out the website, lawyersforemployers.com.au, it does have a lot of that information and some really cool stuff around articles as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jonathan. Always
Thanks,
a pleasure.
Mate. Appreciate it.
So with that in mind, that's actually it for today, guys. Thanks so much for listening into our podcast yet again. Before we go, please leave your feedback as well as any suggestions for any topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Grow Your Business podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Grow Your Business. Have a great day.